Alright, so now that we have the model UV'd, I've brought it into Maya, and let's talk a bit about texture resolution. So we're going to assume that this character is going to be a hero character in a film, and we're going to get as close as here, as close as you can pretty much get. I mean, every once in a while you get right up to the eye, but typically in production that would be a one-off shot, and you would detail that accordingly. But even at this distance, I think it's a safe bet that if we get the appropriate amount of texture resolution, it actually will even hold up to about here, from my experience. So in order to figure that out, we have to think about the final format. Now that's changing these days. Typically the usual format is 2K, 2K wide. But however, we're starting to see films that are being filmed at a 4K format. So we will need to adjust that accordingly. However, we can actually do that after the fact. We can either do it, well, there's two ways. We can do it now, assuming that all the maps are 4K. We'll organize the UVs to accommodate that. Or we can just go into Mari and paint the maps at 8K. And that will give us enough resolution for a 4K format film. However, we're going to pretend that this is a 2K format traditional film and set it from there. So if we were to look at these UVs as is, so this square here is going to be 4K by 4K, 4096 by 4096. So from here to here is going to be about 2K worth of resolution. Now in a film we want to make sure we have at least double what the final resolution is. So for instance, if we were to see his face, for argument's sake, here on film, we want to make sure from cheekbone to cheekbone we have at least 4K worth of resolution. So if we were to grab cheekbone to cheekbone, like so, you can see roughly we have a little bit less than that in the current island that we have. Now, it's not much less, but it's probably 1K worth of resolution less, which is, it could make a difference when we're finally painting this. And the last thing we want to do is have not enough resolution and have to repaint this or even re-UV it and then repaint it. So what I'm going to do is see if we can figure this out here and see if we can accommodate both these islands like so. So I'm going to move those over. I'm going to select everything and then scale it all up. And move these back into place. See if we can fit this in here. It looks good. We can even just give ourselves a little bit more room to breathe. So now if we were to select from cheek to cheek, we can see that, let's see if we were to reorient this, like so. So it's still not quite there. So what I propose now is that we enlarge it even more. And then keep one half the face as one island. And then the other half as the other. Like so. So now if we select from cheek to cheek, this is more than enough resolution for us. because from here to here is about 2K for one side of the face, and then that's 4K in total. So this is pretty good. However, as you can see, this is going to cause a problem for other pieces because you want to keep things uniform, which is what I explained before when I was UVing the back of the head, is that we're probably going to have to cut this up, and turns out we will have to cut this up. So I'm going to do that right now, and I can do it in here because it's already been solved pretty well. I don't have to worry about any more stretching. So I'm going to cut that. Move this piece over and see if we can fit this in sideways. Nope, doesn't look like we will. So unfortunately we're going to have to cut this up again. Not a big deal because it's the back of the head. We'll just move this off here. And then the chin pieces. See if we can fit into one island. Not 100% sure if we can. Looks like we might be able to. Perfect. And then the neck. Looks like it's a bit too long, so we're going to have to do on an angle. I did mention before, in terms of orientation when doing tileable textures, the way I'm UVing this now could pose a bit of a problem because things are all kind of in different orientation. However, for this character, I don't think it's going to be a big enough problem. In my process that I'm going to go through when I'm painting the color maps, I actually will implore a tileable texture as a base. However, the texture is not directional, so it should be fine. However, if you start getting into clothing that is directional, you want to be very wary about how you organize your UVs and what orientation they're in. So when you do a tileable texture that has like a rib to it or streaks to it, that it will flow properly and you don't have to do extra work to try to make it fit. For the ears, we're just going to fit them in here. Like so. It's kind of a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. But the work put in now to get all this to fit will pay dividends in the end when you're actually painting. I find it more beneficial when you're doing hard surface assets to organize things intelligently. Actually, let's try to change this up a bit, just because there's a lot of different materials that you have to go through, and if you can organize things per material in Mari, it makes it exponentially easier to paint. There we go. And then here inside the nostrils, which we could probably place just in here. Again, orientation isn't so important, just make sure they're in there. Same with the inner eyes. Just going to stick these in here as well. And then the carunculus. It doesn't really matter where I put these. In fact, what I'm going to do for these pieces is I'm actually going to increase the size of them. And yes, it's going to be out of scale, but it's better for something like this inside the eye here to have a little bit more resolution, so we're not fighting that soft look, because in there it gets kind of crunchy with displacement, and we want to get that kind of crunchy look, and to have a bit more real estate there is going to pay off in the end for us. So I'm going to increase that, and you can do that every once in a while when you, like for instance, like nuts and bolts on a hard surface asset, you always want to make those a higher resolution than typically what's around it, just because you want to make sure that nothing goes soft. And so here are the corneas and the scleras. So I'm not going to worry about these too much at this point. So this is the back of the eye, so I'm going to actually shrink that down because we're never actually going to see it, and it just takes up space. The same thing for this one. And then I'm going to increase the size. So you could, you could just stick it in one tile here. I think that's more than appropriate. Or you can have one tile per eye. But for our purposes and for hero work, this should be plenty of resolution. And then for these, I'm actually not going to really worry about these too much, because we're not actually going to put texture on these. Because they are clear, and it's mostly shader work. But I'm just going to get them in line. The only texture work you kind of do put on these is a bit of a warble. So the reflections aren't 100% perfect in the bumper displacement. But we can do that pretty easily procedurally, or we can do that later in the paint. And there you go. So this is a typical, there really isn't any typical setup, but this is generally how I would cut stuff up in UV it and then place it out for something this hero. So that covers UVs. Again, if you guys have any questions about this, I know you're not going to be actually UVing the character, but if you have any other UV questions, we can cover that in the webinar at the end of this week or during this week, whenever it's scheduled. And then we can go from there. So in the next section, I'm going to talk a bit about what we need to do for next week. We're not actually going to do any painting this week. I want this week for you guys to focus more on getting everything set up in terms of your reference, your color palettes, basically a plan of action so we can get started, and then we can take it from there. So I'll have a write-up for the end of this week for your actual assignment. And then just to give you a quick preview, next week we're not actually going to be painting the color maps. The first thing we actually will be doing for this character is we'll be painting the fine pore displacement, and I will cover that in incredible depth next week. So yeah, let's get going on the reference collection and the color palette, and then we can talk a bit more about what else is needed for next week.